On the show this week, Nicola Sturgeon's shock resignation as Scotland's First Minister has left the future of Scottish independence in doubt. We'll look at what's next for the movement. We'll be speaking with former First Scotland Minister Alex Salmond. But we start with Nicola Sturgeon's shock resignation as First Minister and leader of the SNP, which has upended the quest for Scottish independence, with now the future of the movement itself in doubt. Well, Lizzie Burden explains.
My intention to step down as First Minister and leader of my party.
If Nicola Sturgeon can't lead Scotland to independence, who can? As the nation's longest serving and first female First Minister, she's been a force to be reckoned with. But then, in a complete surprise, she announced she's quitting. So what's next? Under her leadership, the Scottish National Party has dominated every election north of the border since the 2014 independence referendum, turbocharged by opposition to Brexit. But her repeated campaigns for a second independence vote have fallen flat. Now Sturgeon's party is deciding how next to pressure the UK to hold another vote. And with a recent YouGov poll showing that support for both the SNP and independence has waned, opinion is split. Some say a decision to use the next UK general election as a de facto vote on independence, as Nicola Sturgeon had planned, would be a mistake, because it wouldn't be recognised. Whatever direction the nationalist movement takes, Nicola Sturgeon won't be the driving force. She's handing over that hot potato to her successor, saying she won't stand in the way.
Lizzie Burden there on Nicola Sturgeon's legacy as Scotland's First Minister. Now, we're now joined by the former Scottish First Minister and SNP leader, Alex Salmond, who now leads the pro-independence Alba Party. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Salmond. Whatever your differences with Nicola Sturgeon, you have to acknowledge is that she was a very powerful voice, of course, in the independence movement. Does her departure damage the push for independence?
Well, obviously, it'll go through a new phase, but can I just remind you, when I resigned in 2014, I heard exactly the same voices saying independence was peaked. And what happened was a few months later, the unionist parties, Labour and Conservative, they lost all their seats in Scotland. So support for Scottish independence shifted in 2014 to almost half of the population, and basically it has remained there, up and down certainly, but it's remained there ever since. So the next leader who comes in to lead the SNP and become First Minister will inherit a position incomparably better than when I became the First Minister back in 2007.
But do you see a risk now that internal divisions, but also a lack of a strong, obvious successor to Nicola Sturgeon will lead to the resurgence of pro-union political politics and policies, including Labour?
Well, I mean, certainly it's the case that a difference between now and 2014 is that when I resigned, Nicola Sturgeon was a shoo-in to be my successor. This time round, there's maybe half a dozen people who would have a claim, some of the old guard, but some new faces, but they're talented people. And the next leader comes in, and it'll depend entirely on what that leader does. If that new First Minister reunites the independence movement, perhaps through an independence convention, brings in parties like ALPA and the Greens who believe in independence, cross-party groups, then the process might be a reinvigorating one. It will depend entirely what happens when the new leader comes in. Right. But, the Unionist Party thinking that, what happens to the SNP, any political party who believes that their success depends on what another party does is doomed for failure. That's what happens to political parties who don't have a clue how to do things for themselves.
Right, but as you've said, this relies solely on the new leader. Who do you think should lead this party? Who do you think has the best chance? So they have to be like Nicola Sturgeon.
Well, there's choices. I mean, they can go for the people who've been around for a while. There's sort of people like Angus Robertson, Humza Yousaf, Keith Brown, or they could go for the new guard of people coming through. There's people like Kate Forbes, Ash Denham. There's a variety of people in Westminster who are talented. Angus MacNeil, Joanna Cherry, who successfully defeated Boris Johnson in the English High Court on Brexit. So there's a range of talented people. Well, what's going to matter?
Who's your money on? If there's one person that you think...
No, I think it'll be one of the new guard. And what will happen is what will decide whether this is a reinvigoration of the national movement or a setback will be what that new leader does. But can I just repeat that, When I became leader of the SNP way back for the first time, the SNP were, independence was a pipe dream supported by a small number of people. The SNP were a fringe party. The SNP are now the dominant party in Scotland. The national movement is the most powerful force in Scotland. A reunited national movement will be unstoppable. And therefore, a lot's going to depend who is elected and, above all, the approach they take to bring the movement back together.
But what would you consider to be Sturgeon's greatest achievement during her time in office, given actually you're not really any closer to independence since 2014?
Well, her greatest achievement was as a communicator. I mean, Nicola is a first-class political communicator, as was shown during Brexit. I beg your pardon, as was shown during the pandemic, I would say, where the messaging from Edinburgh was much, much superior to the messaging from London. And she wins elections. But you're quite right. I mean, her failure has been she hasn't advanced the support for independence further forward than it was 8 years ago. But it was at a high level 8 years ago. So the SNP and the national movement and the next First Minister are looking for a strategy as well as looking for a new leader. But if that strategy is found, and if it's part of uniting the movement, then the process can be a reinvigorating one. As I say, political parties who think that they need the SNP failure or the SNP indecision as the route to success, any political party that wants to succeed has to do it on their own merits. That applies to the Unionist Party, applies to the party I lead, it applies to every political party, and it applies to the SNP.
So what would you focus on at the moment? Is this actually a good opportunity to focus, all of the energy on independence, and is this a distraction instead of focusing on improving the quality of public services and the performance of the Scottish economy?
Well, I mean, the problems that the Scottish Government have encountered recently have been because they've shifted focus onto other issues apart from independence. And the next leader should settle these. I mean, there's problems in the health service and the education system. There's difficulties with some legislation coming, lack of enforcing a commitment, the gender recognition bill. The key to winning independence is to get the focus back onto, the biggest issue in Scotland. And you're about to talk about Centrica profits. We've got 1 million Scots in fuel poverty amid our land of energy plenty. We have a nation which is being denied the right of self-determination. That's the issue.
So focus less on independence and focus more on these issues. If you also look at the budget deficit in Scotland, it's much higher than the UK's overall. It's much higher than many EU countries, and certainly than the EU's preferred level. What's the right way forward?
Well, the right way forward is to get the focus back on independence. I mean, this impression that the trouble with the SNP's encountered is because they focused on independence. The trouble the SNP's encountered is because they've been focusing on other issues which have split their party and their movement. Get the focus onto independence, onto the arguments for it. And incidentally, the idea that the most energy-rich country in Europe, which has massive supplies of clean, green, renewable, affordable power coming out of its ears, could produce 5 times as much electricity as it requires, will be in any economic difficulty with independence, is for the birds. Independence will be the key to unlock a prosperous future for Scotland.
What should the new SNP leader do with currency? So would an independent Scotland actually have a new currency and attempt to join the euro, or continue to use sterling and import some of the monetary policy from the rest of the UK?
Well, that's been one of the difficulties that the SNP have had deciding, and I would advise the new leader to opt for a new currency as quickly as possible. Of course, you'll always be able to use sterling, because sterling's an internationally tradable currency, but the most economically advantageous position would be to opt for a new currency as quick as possible. And as far as Europe's concerned, an ambition to rejoin the European Union over the medium term is fair enough, but the immediate priority is to get back into the single market. And the way to do that is through the European Free Trade Association, where the timescale for entry into that is a matter of months, not the years it takes you to get back into the European Union. So I certainly would advocate we should orientate the European policy towards rejoining the largest single market in the world through the European Free Trade Association.
But if you start talking about a new currency, does that not alienate voters that maybe then go to Labour?
Well, if you explain it properly and explain it in the sense that you can keep your assets in sterling if you so wish, so you keep your pension in sterling if you so wish, there's no difficulty with that. But the advantages of having a new currency in terms of economic flexibility are very, very strong. You've got to remember the UK is now a weak economy. It's a weak economy for two reasons. It has low productivity, and secondly, it is denied access to the biggest single market in the world on unfettered terms. The way to ensure success for the Scottish economy is to use our high productivity in key industries like energy and to get back into that 500 million single market. That should be the economic priority. It's worth looking, incidentally, that Northern Ireland, which traditionally, as you know, has been one of the most difficult areas for growth in the United Kingdom, because it stayed in the single market after the Brexit deal, has had the best relative economic statistics in history compared to the other nations of the UK. That should be a clue to what Scotland's economic priority should be, and that's rejoining the single market.
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of numbers. We'll have to get you back on because there are numbers also that we're looking at that are independent that have questionable statistics on education and the like.
Yes,
Alba Party leader and former Scottish.
Interesting, because previously
we'll get you back on.
Northern Ireland's slow growth rate. The very fact that there's an argument now indicates the advantage of access to the single market.